All right, let's look at some of the featured herbs in this section. We'll start over here and take a look, and then we will, like we've been doing in all these other sections, we'll talk about the herbs, we'll take a look at them, and we'll kind of do a bit of a summary there. Let's start with St. John's wort. This really is sort of the marquee herb that we think of when we think of treating depression. One of the main challenges is that we get into the habit of using it because so many people, when they see us, are on some kind of a medication, and so we automatically rule out St. John's wort, which, as mentioned, is a good idea. You don't want to mix those two. It can cause serotonin syndrome, so we actually obviously want to avoid that. But let's talk about St. John's wort. I do use it. I do like it. I'm not afraid of it. If a patient's not on medications, I think it's a great herb. I'm not afraid to even use it fairly high dose. Uplifting, nerving. Yep. That's how I would class it. It does seem to calm and brighten the mind. We could probably say the same is true, much less degree, of calendula and borage and wood betony. Those can go together. I think I mentioned a medicinal wine that was used in the last section, those three. And I've done it. I've actually made it and brought it to parties before, and it is actually quite nice. So it's an antiviral, that's true. It's not really why we're talking about it here, or is it? Don't know. It does get sometimes used as a vulnerary as well. Got a lot of constituents in it. It's got hyperforin, it's got hypericin, it's got a couple others as well. We're not exactly sure which constituent is responsible. We thought for a long time it was, I think, hypericin, and now we think maybe it's hyperforin, or probably it's a combination of all the constituents kind of acting together collectively. Don't know. Don't know for sure. Mood dysregulation, yep, sure. This one is true also. Sensitization. So people who use this herb can definitely get photosensitivity. Photosensitivity. And as you guys probably remember, the fairer someone's skin is, so if you think someone with very fair skin, freckles, red hair, they're more likely to get a photosensitization reaction. Okay, also excellent, we've talked about this, but also excellent as a topical oil for herpetic lesions. I like it a lot. I don't know as much about herpes zoster. I don't think it works as well there, but for your classic HSV 1 and 2, I do find it quite effective. Okay, often paired with, as we mentioned, there we go, for depression. Seasonal affective disorder, yeah, we talked about it at the onset. You can do these things. It doesn't work as well. Mostly those people, most of what they need is some sunshine and some life and some vitality, but I think it's worth considering as well. Let's take a look at it now as a herb. And it's quite a nice one. And the really nice thing is this one grows abundantly here in Southern Ontario. So if you're in the area, it's a nice one to harvest. Once you notice it, you'll see it all over the place. And it can grow in some pretty large clusters. That's actually probably a nice picture of it right there is probably the best. This is often how we see it. And, oh, here's a nice picture of the flower. You'll see, so it actually, yeah, this is good. You can see a couple of little dots in the leaves. They're kind of little ones like that. And it gets its name perforatum because it was thought that those were little dots that you could actually see through. I think the truth is actually those are an oil that are in it. And it's actually quite rich in oil. And if you fresh tincture it, also if you dry tincture it, the first few days, it turns really a beautiful red. Now, that passes as other things come out, but it really does. It maintains a little bit of a red hue, but hypericum oil, for example, which might be a good way to do it. I don't know. I haven't used that. That's not true. I've used that topically for herpes. That's in fact what we use for herpes. But as a tincture, I haven't used that topically. But as a tincture, we use the whole plant. We don't just use the flower. And I do think we're pretty confident that the rest of the plant likewise contains those constituents that we want. So we use the aerial parts. Probably skip the stem. Maybe you could include it. I'm not sure. But that's St. John's wort. You will see it around here. Once you know it, you'll see it quite often. And you can harvest this. You can harvest quite a lot of this actually around here. While we're here, let's take a look at another key herb. Let's do rhodiola next. I mean, Panax ginseng certainly hogs a lot of the attention when we talk about stimulating adaptogens, and it's a great one. Stimulating adaptogens or sort of a source qi jing level tonic. It's pretty good, but it is stimulating. I do think it's yang. You'll see in a couple places it's more considered qi, but I don't think that's true. I do class it personally as a yang herb. But that's Panax ginseng. We're talking about rhodiola. Rhodiola also very much classed as a yang herb. This one is a real performance enhancing adaptogen. I have not seen it in the wild. As far as I know, that's more or less what it looks like there. As far as I know, the reason I choose this picture is it grows in rocks and crevices, and it's quite a hardy plant. I don't know if we can quite say it's a desert plant, but I do know it grows in the mountains, so it's arid. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it actually only really grows in a couple regions of the world where it is higher altitude. I know the Altai Mountains, I believe, which some really cool stuff comes from the Altai Mountains, actually, which I believe is actually where a lot of the best rhodiola comes from, though I know you can grow it in other climates. But it's a fairly modest plant. We use the root. It gets its name Rhodiola rosea because it smells very rosy. When you see the root, it's pink and it smells like roses. Let's go back over and take a look at it here. This is a herb I use fairly often. I actually really like rhodiola. It is a true, almost in the truest sense of the word, adaptogen. You take this one for enhancing performance and your ability to cope. It's a great herb for students. If you're staring down 2 weeks of exams, 10 days of exams, then rhodiola, getting the dose right is going to be important because you don't want to overstimulate, and if that's your constitution's already overstimulated, it's not a good choice. But it is a performance enhancing herb, both physical and mental. That's probably the keynote for rhodiola, and it definitely classes as a nootropic as well. This improves physical and mental performance. This is a performance enhancing herb. Okay. Fatigue from overwork. Oh, lowered libido. Sure, we use it for that. Mental, physical stress. Altitude sickness. I haven't used it for that, but that seems to be something it's useful for as well. Mostly, probably the polyphenols are the main active ingredients or constituents here. Not considered toxic. It's not. It's quite safe. I can actually consume it, not as a food, but I've certainly had it as a powder. I used to put it in oatmeal. I think I remember back when I was a student, maybe studying for my board exams, I would mix a tablespoon into my oatmeal in the morning. And that had quite a rosy flavor, which I don't know that I necessarily loved, but it made a significant difference. Here's something you do want to remember that's not up here. It is quite potently astringent. And that's an important thing to remember about it. It's very astringent, and we want that because that helps us clear damp and phlegm, like we've talked about. Depression often thought of as phlegm settling, phlegm depressing, a heaviness, so that we can dry it and disperse it. Actually makes rhodiola a very strong choice in depression. Potent adaptogen. It works best in 3-week cycles. I might even say 2-week cycles, but it does seem to work that way. If you take rhodiola forever, I think it actually becomes too stimulating. Like lots of different medicines, you could even still think of rhodiola as a herb that's used to clear an excess, but it will, if you don't have an excess and you take rhodiola, you will burn yourself up. If you do have an excess and you take rhodiola, it will help balance that out. So you might take it, but like any herb that's used to clear an excess, at a certain point when the excess is cleared, you start having side effects from taking a herb if there's no longer anything for it to work against. So rhodiola, I think, is best in 2-week cycles, maybe 3-week cycles. And if you're just taking it for performance enhancing, I think you have to rest after that. I think you have to put back some of what you've mobilized through that. Okay, that's our rhodiola. Good herb. I think really quite a good herb, and I agree with this. Smilax, which is our sarsaparilla, that's our closest substitute, and it's one that I pair together. Like I said before, particularly for BPH, I pair those together quite often. And I think since we're already at the R's and we started talking about it, let's look at sarsaparilla next. Yep, there it is right there. Smilax officinalis. So with a name like sarsaparilla or sarsaparilla, you can assume that it is indeed mostly from Spanish-speaking places. This is often called, you'll often see it as Mexican sarsaparilla. It doesn't only grow in Mexico, southern U.S., and then down through Mexico, of course. This is where most of the best sarsaparilla comes from. This is the original root beer. I don't know if that's probably, yeah, there's excellent tonic. There it is, original root beer. Not all of them. There were a couple other ones in there, of course, but sarsaparilla was a main one, and it was really used. It's one of our few adaptogen and alternatives. So this is really quite a nice herb. It helps uplift, it helps astringe or tonify a little bit, and it helps things move and clear. It's a good herb. It's good. I do think you have to use it in fairly high dose, and I think you can use it in decoction or what do we have here? use it in decoction or as tincture. I think it's good in both, or as powder. I've definitely done that as well, and it's quite nice. Let's see, vanilla goes well. That's just delicious. Hemidesmus indicus, which is sometimes called, so I mentioned specifically here Mexican sarsaparilla because this is often called Indian sarsaparilla, and we've also got Chinese sarsaparilla, which I would actually say this one not interchangeable. It's fine herb, we use it for other things, nothing wrong with it, but this one, it doesn't look the same, doesn't feel the same or taste the same. Indian sarsaparilla, I think, I don't know if it's as potent as a medicine, but it is definitely tastier as a herb. If I were to choose only one herb to turn into a sipping drink or a cocktail, it would be the Hemidesmus, the Indian sarsaparilla. I do use the Hemidesmus in combos and formulas as well. Okay, so that's our sarsaparilla. Let's go take a look at it on our screen over here. There it is, Smilax officinalis. So we use, it's mostly the root, of course, as you'd assume from root beer. Let's see if we can pull up a picture of the root. There it is there. There you go. That's the root. So above, of course, is the plant, but that's what the root looks like. It's a pretty classic looking root. It's got these sort of striations. Sometimes we already get it and it's been shredded. I'm not sure to what degree it's the inner versus the outer root. I don't actually know that. I just know we use the root generally, but that's our sarsaparilla. It makes these flowers and it makes these berries. And I point that out because we're going to see that a number of adaptogens actually have similar. Now these ones are a little bit loose. That's a little bit better. Those kind of berry clusters, often red, sometimes black. And we'll see that even this leaf pattern, there's sort of a characteristic plant look that suggests that a plant is an adaptogen. Often they're fairly unassuming plants. We're going to see that when we look at Panax ginseng. It looks like really not very much. One thing that's interesting is Hydrastis, which we don't think of as an adaptogen. It's a pretty potent antimicrobial and decongestant, but it also looks quite similar to some of the Panax family. All right, there's our sarsaparilla. Let's look at Panax ginseng next. Here we are. Yeah, first things that come up are usually, some of these are hilarious. First things that come up are usually supplements because a lot of people take it as a supplement. This, I've seen this picture before, I might have even done it in one of the videos. There is a belief that the more the root looks like a human, the more potent it is. There's no way that's true, but that certainly persists in Chinese superstition. So much so that a root that looked like this will cost you thousands more. I don't know if you can see it clearly on yours, but not only do we have 2 arms and a leg, right in here we've got a fairly phallic component of root sticking out. The only thing that would make that more valuable is if it was turned the other way. So don't worry, don't even think about that. But if you go down to a Chinese store, you will often see in the jars behind the counters these really human-looking roots. I'm sure in some cases they actually will grow them intentionally to try and make them look like that. So that's our ginseng root. It definitely doesn't have to look like that, but let's see. There we go. There's the plant right there. Actually, let's pull that up. So there's the plant. You can see there's that cluster of red berries. Now this would actually be a fairly robust looking ginseng plant. Often they're more subtle and they're actually smaller. And sometimes these berries are more tightly clustered. But that would be a nice looking ginseng plant. Let's see if we can see anything else. Yeah, there's more what I think of when I think of ginseng. So a less robust and kind of a more round bulb. But a lot of them, like this has, I don't know if it has 5 leaves, but there are a number of plants that just kind of look like this. We have one here in Canada, and I know it's in the same Aureliaceae family, but I haven't really experimented with it. What I'd like to do sometime is just learn more about it or even dig it up. And it's always a little dangerous to just dig up some roots and eat them or drink them and see what happens. But I'm tempted because it makes this berry and it has a root and it's even got a bit of that ginseng smell. So I think probably someone knows more about it. I know, again, I do know it's in the Aureliaceae family. I think sometimes it's called Arrow. It's got a name, but I don't know as much about it. Anyway, here we're talking about our Panax ginseng. Let's even see if we can go up and pull up a picture of the root, because we often talk about Panax ginseng. It is the root that we use. Now here's something that you're going to notice that's kind of interesting. What we see here, this is all unprocessed root. These are the white, oh good, we've got the two together. These are the white roots. So this actually says Korean red ginseng, but this isn't red ginseng yet. This is same species, but this would be considered white ginseng. How similar are the actions? I think probably very similar personally, but this is true Korean red ginseng, and you can see the difference compared to the rest of what we see here. This has been steamed. When you steam it, it brings out that red character. It makes it stickier. It actually makes it a little bit sweeter as well. And TCM, it's a way of adding yang is to steam it. You're kind of activating it a little bit. I don't know that it makes a real therapeutic difference, but a lot of the stuff that you get, particularly as the best ginseng does come from Korea, though a lot of good stuff in China too, because of course they have fairly similar regions. A lot of the best ginseng, though, is the Korean, and it's the Korean red specifically that's used. However, I don't think you have to worry about the white, although most of what you get here will indeed be the red. Okay, let's come back over here, and let's look at our Korean red, which is usually what I call it, although it doesn't matter, of course, that it's red. Here we go. Here's our Panax ginseng. I think we've talked about this one considerably. Stimulating adaptogen, immune stimulant, yes. Libido stimulant, yes, it is. There's such a thing called GAS, ginseng abuse syndrome. You can take ginseng. It will push your libido if you're a male. It will push your performance, but you're borrowing from tomorrow. You're borrowing from tomorrow's Jing. That's one of the most traditional uses. I've probably heard me tell this story before, but ginseng was often used in high doses at the end of someone's life when the end was definitely near, and you wanted to keep someone lucid and present so that in the olden days when it took longer, the family could gather, say their farewells, come together. You would use high dose ginseng to push the last of that Jing so as someone could be as clear as possible, to really push the source qi and the Jing. So there it is, that end of life care. It's a great herb even just to use generally in old people, not in those older people, not in those high doses, but in ongoing amounts as a qi and a yang tonic. Contains ginsenosides, contains steroidal saponins. We're actually pretty confident that these are what have the majority of the action in ginseng. Been fairly well studied compared to some of the other herbs for sure. Non-toxic, can be overstimulating. Don't use it in hypertension, or don't use it where there's a lot of heat, of course. Excellent herb, truly fortifying. There's a reason why this has such a mythological place in herbal medicine, and it's largely because it is very effective. It's not actually magical, but it is definitely a potent herb. There we go, that's that bit about Korean red is the steamed, white ginseng is the unprepared, same species. Steamed root is generally preferred medicinally, but I don't know, again, that it's necessarily stronger. Okay, so those are some of our stimulating adaptogens. Let's look at kava kava. Kava kava. I don't know why you have to say it twice. Pipermethysticum is the name, the Latin name. This one, unnerving, definitely. Mild euphoric, yes. Analgesic, sure, mostly because of its sort of euphoric. And I would even say it's not sleepy. It doesn't make someone sleep, but it is definitely a relaxing nervine. It's to take this, especially if you take it, as you get closer to recreational doses, it's quite pleasant. It really does soothe and calm. Now, one of the challenges is, I don't know if this is in here. Let's see, it's not in here. It very reliable. You're going to get, in fact, if you don't have this, then it's not good stuff. You're going to get tingling, tongue, and mouth, and this one often happens. You're going to get a sinus drip / decongestion. I know every time I have it, if I have a certain amount, I feel my sinuses just kind of start to clear out and move down. It's quite nice. I enjoy it, but that happens very reliably. Also, I do think there can be a little bit of stomach upset. And I've even had one person who had quite a bit of it, but she got diarrhea the next day. She was actually one of our earlier IMG students who wanted to just see what would happen if she took a bunch of kava and the next day, had some diarrhea. So I've certainly seen GI upset. I would say particularly the stomach, but obviously here more broad. These things can happen with kava. Usually though, not the tingling, that's going to happen no matter what. But usually the GI upset, the diarrhea, we'd only see that as the dose kind of got beyond what we would take therapeutically and more into what we might take recreationally. All right, that's kava. Let's see, very unique. Let's see. The kava lactone's fine. This we think is true. Best extracted in a fat-based liquid such as coconut milk. Often, if you are making it recreationally, that's how it's done. But the tincture at 40%, those really are still quite effective. And I think I used to believe that less, and then I've just used it more. I've had patients who came in and they were already using the tincture. And even when I've sampled it as a tincture, I tried some just the other day, just because someone asked, how powerful is it? Let's check it out. So we all had a little shot of it, and it is enough that a tablespoon dose of kava kava has notable effects that are pleasant generally. So I think that I used to say, no, you really got to do it this way. I'm actually much more confident now saying the tincture is actually really a pretty good way to take it. Okay. That's our kava kava. Let's take a look at a picture of some kava kava. And let's see, there it is, kava kava. Also, you got that heart-shaped leaf again, fairly unassuming plant. There we go. This would be fairly crudely cut root, but this is okay. It's okay. It's much more finely shredded, but it is this color, kind of a light beige. Sometimes you've got some darker spots in. Let's keep going, see if we can find a little better picture there. That's not the best that I've seen. Maybe there's one more down here. Yeah, that's better. Oh, good. So let's look at these two. So that's often how we see it when we get it. This is the powder, though. And I would suggest, in general, the powder here is one of the better ways to take kava. When I make kava, which I've done for multiple parties, I'll start with the powder. And I'll get some chocolate and I'll get some coconut milk. Sometimes I put a little bit of cinnamon there. I think that's quite nice. You can add whatever you want. And I'll make a large crock pot of kava. You don't want to overheat it. I think that's one of the mistakes people make with kava, is that it does seem to be somewhat heat sensitive. So you want it to be warm, but ideally probably less than about 30 degrees. You go up 40 is probably fine too. But the kava, especially if you use the powder with the coconut milk, and I usually put a bar of chocolate in there and let it melt. It's pretty good. And that gives you quite a nice drink. A couple mugs of that, and you do notice a difference. Not that I'm advocating maybe I am. You know what? This is Bot Med class. I am advocating exploration of herbs that have effects. Certainly, don't do anything you're not comfortable with, but go ahead, go for it. That's how you're going to learn these things. That's how I learned probably most of what I know about what herbs really do, and sometimes it's not necessarily exactly what you've read in books that have repeated over the years, is to just take a high dose of them and see what happens. Careful. Okay, there's our kava kava. Let's see what else we want to explore. We talked about rhodiola, smilax. Oh yeah, let's go into these next two. Stachys, which is wood betony, and borage. We'll do these together. They're not interchangeable, but I would say where I prescribe one, I usually prescribe the other. I often put them together. And this is for anxiety, restlessness, yeah. Headaches, sure. Melancholy, depression, I guess food retention, sure. I don't really use it as much. I don't use it at all for that. Recurrent nightmares or visions, that's a traditional use. And again, we see it down here with borage. We see it down here with St. John's wort. And sometimes we see it with calendula. That was the other one I added above. Verbena also hangs out with that group. They're all aerial parts. They're all reasonably good nervines. They're useful. They're kind of special as a group, actually. Like if you mix all of those together and have them as a strong tea, there is a feeling there. There is something to it. So I like wood betony. I put wood betony in most sleep formulas. I don't know if we even mentioned that in our anxiety insomnia, but I do put it in a lot of formulas there, and I think it helps. I think it does something. I think there's something to its traditional use as an herb that helps dispel night visions, or helps with sleep or prevented by nightmares. Here's our borage, same kind of thing. Nervine, maybe a bit of an alternative. Mild euphoric, mild adaptogen. Mild adaptogen, we used to talk more about it as an adaptogen. I truthfully never really thought it was much of an adaptogen, but because borage oil can be quite nutritious and act as an adaptogen, we kind of transferred that over to borage, the herb. I don't think that's a fair transfer, but we do see it there. Topical Vulnerary, same. I don't use it as such, but it shows up in a couple of traditional usages as a Vulnerary. Okay, same thing, nervous exhaustion presenting like depression. That's a little different than what we saw, but it's the same kind of idea. Depressive states characterized by fear, feeling of helplessness, and a lack of courage to take action. That is very much a traditional herbalist's approach. Don't attach too much to that. I think we're always drawn to when we hear these things. It's part of the allure, similar to homeopathy, right? Like it gives us a narrative. We can be like, oh, okay, this is a character. This is a narrative. This is a story I can bite into. The more I've worked with herbs, the less romanticized I am by those stories. I like them. Everyone likes a good story, but I haven't really seen most of them come true. They're fairy tales, I think, more than they are evidence-based. Which doesn't mean we discount them, but I've largely moved away. I like Western botanical medicine is rich, as most of them are, rich with folklore and stories, but don't get too attached to them. I would say, obviously, this bit of a broader discussion between, traditional use and evidence-based. The answer, like most things, is always going to be somewhere in the middle. And on any given topic, it might be a little bit more here, it might be a little bit more here too. That's fine, but I include it. Don't get too attached to it. That's our borage. Let's go take a look at pictures of the two of those. So let's go to borage. There it is. Really quite an attractive flower. One of the few really blue, sometimes a little bit purple, but quite a nice looking plant. That's a good picture of it right there. Quite a nice looking plant. You can grow this around here. It grows quite well. And you can almost tell by looking at it, it's got some richness to it. I would look at that and be like, oh yeah, that's probably a good food source. I could probably eat that if I was lost in the wild. And hopefully I'm never lost in the wild, but if I ever am, I'm either going to do fine or run into real problems because I'm going to eat too many things out there. Actually, this is true. I think this is true. I've observed this. One thing most herbalists have in common is one of the first things they do when they get into the woods or out on the land is they just start putting things in their mouth. And I'm sure some of them, I have personally myself at least twice run into problems from doing that, but it seems to be a uniform trait of herbalists. It's like, oh, what's this? And before even necessarily thinking, it's like, okay, let me taste it, smell it, what's it like? And sometimes that's not such a good idea. That's our borage. It's nice. It can be grown, as you can probably guess, it can be grown commercially or for in a garden, just to kind of decoratively is the word I'm looking there. But it also grows in the wild. And here's our stach. It's also a nice looking flower, but sometimes this is called Botanica officinalis. Sometimes it's called Botanica stachys. I believe, as far as I know, the correct Latin name does remain Stachys botanica. But don't be surprised if you see a different name. That seems to be one where they just haven't quite solidified, or it hasn't really stuck. Okay, yeah, so you can see, I'm trying to actually tell, because I don't remember if this is in the mint family or not, but it looks like it should be. And we saw earlier it could be for food retention, so I'm going to go ahead and guess that it is, because we see these alternating leaf patterns here, I think. I can't quite tell here. And it does indeed look like the mint family. Even that flower pattern is fairly characteristic of mints. So I'm going to assume, I wonder if we can find out, that it is indeed in that family. Or if not in that family, probably closely related, as several things are. Okay, that's Stachys botanica. The only one we haven't looked at yet was Eleuthero. Eleuthero, I feel like I don't give it enough airplay. It probably is a good adaptogen. I've got some reservations about it, but even to look at it, you're like, oh, well, what does that look like? That sure looks like the ginsengs that we saw, where we've got that root, even that sort of like human-shaped root. We've got that circular, tightly bundled cone, and we've got this kind of leaf pattern that we've seen. So probably is a pretty good adaptogen. I think I just haven't really ever connected with it. This one partly is, part of the story behind this was, one of the years where the Russians were doping and dominating global Olympics and competitions. They were saying, oh, it's because we're giving all our athletes this. And they published a whole bunch of papers. A lot of the, at least original research on Eleuthero came from Russia. And it was at a time when they were kind of trying to hide what their athletes were really doing. I mentioned that once in a class, and after the class, a student who was from Russia came up and she was very angry with me. So if that offends you, I guess I apologize, but it does seem to probably be accurate. I think we know That's Eleuthero though, and it probably is an excellent adaptogen. Nothing is as good as steroids at promoting performance, but Eleuthero probably does work as a nice adaptogen. If we're going to class it as an adaptogen, it would class as a chi tonic. I think of it as very similar to ashwagandha. Okay, I think we'll wrap up our featured herbs there. Hope you've enjoyed our section, and we'll see you in the next video.